The light was red. That was the last normal thought Kaylin Kai Evans had. One moment, she was slumped in the driver's seat of her decade-old Honda, the engine humming a tune of weary survival that matched her own. The fabric of her faded navy scrubs felt rough against her skin, a constant reminder of the 14-hour double shift that had just ended. She was on the phone with her sister, Lisa, the conversation a familiar litany of complaints that served as their ritualistic decompression. "I swear, Lisa, the paperwork is going to kill a patient before the disease is due," Kai mumbled, leaning her head against the cool glass of the window. Rain, thin and miserable, slicked the Chicago streets, turning the evening glow of the city into a blurry watercolor of neon and asphalt. "And the student loan statement that came today? I think I'm officially working for the Department of Education now." Lisa's laugh crackled through the speakerphone. "Just think of it as a patriotic duty, Kai. You're funding America, one bedpan at a time." Kai was about to offer a retort when the world outside her bubble of exhaustion tore itself apart. It began with a sound that didn't belong, the high-pitched scream of performance tires on wet pavement. A glossy black SUV, the kind that costs more than Kai's entire education, swerved violently and slammed to a halt at a canted angle in the middle of the intersection. Ahead of it, a sleek European sedan sat with its driver's door ajar. Time seemed to warp, stretching and compressing. Two figures in dark hoodies scrambled from the SUV. There were shouts, guttural and terrified. A struggle, a glint of metal in the streetlight. Then, a single, definitive pop. It wasn't like the thunderous blasts in movies. It was a flat, ugly, percussive sound that cut through the city's drone with surgical precision. It was the sound of something breaking irreparably. For a heartbeat, the street held its breath. Then, chaos erupted. People on the sidewalk, previously anonymous figures under umbrellas, screamed. They scattered like birds, a wave of primal fear propelling them away from the epicenter of the noise. Car horns blared in a panicked, useless chorus. Inside her Honda, Kai's own heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic drumbeat of terror. Her first instinct, the one shared by every other sane person on that street, was to get away, to duck, to drive, to survive. But then, another instinct took over. It was older, deeper, and more demanding. It was the instinct that had driven her through sleepless nights of study, through the gore and grief of the emergency room, through the quiet moments of holding a dying patient's hand. It was the nurse in her. She saw a figure crumple to the pavement beside the luxury sedan. The two assailants scrambled back into their SUV, which fishtailed wildly before speeding off into the night, disappearing into the city's concrete labyrinth. "Lisa, I have to go," Kai said, her voice suddenly steady, clear, and devoid of the fatigue it held moments before. "Kai? What's happening? I heard a—" Kai didn't answer. She ended the call, threw the car into park, and unbuckled her seatbelt. Without a second thought for her own safety, she was out of the car, the cold rain a shock on her face as she ran. She didn't run away. She ran towards. The man on the ground was large, athletic, and bleeding with a speed that defied belief. A dark, rich pool of crimson was already spreading rapidly around him, staining the wet asphalt. He was groaning, a low, desperate sound of agony and fading consciousness. She knelt beside him, her worn-out sneakers instantly soaked. The man's face, contorted in pain, was vaguely familiar, but in this moment of crisis, celebrity meant nothing. He was not a face from a billboard, he was a body, failing. Her eyes, trained and sharp, immediately found the source. A single, small hole in his upper thigh, high up near the groin. It looked deceptively minor, but the torrent of blood told a different story. Her mind, a flash drive of medical knowledge, provided the diagnosis in a nanosecond. Femoral artery. She knew what that meant. He didn't have minutes. He had seconds. There was no time for a proper tourniquet, no first aid kit, no sterile supplies. There was only the street, the rain, the dying man, and her. "Hey, stay with me! What's your name?" she yelled, her voice a command. The man's eyes fluttered. "Marcus," he gasped. Oh my God. A distant part of her brain registered. It's Marcus Thorne, the meteor, the city's golden-armed quarterback, the hero. Kai ripped the fabric of his expensive trousers, the material tearing with a satisfying shriek. The wound was a horrific, pulsing fountain. Her training screamed at her. Direct pressure. But a simple press on top wouldn't work. The artery was too deep, the pressure from the heart too strong. It had to be stopped at the source. She made a decision that wasn't in any textbook. It was a desperate, primal calculus of life and death. Gritting her teeth against the revulsion she knew would come later, she plunged her finger-sure bare, ungloved fingers deep into the raw, wet heat of the bullet wound. The sensation was grotesque. She felt the slick slide of muscle tissue, the hard resistance of bone. The man screamed, a raw, piercing cry of agony. "I'm sorry, I'm so sorry, but I have to," she shouted over him, her own voice trembling. She ignored the metallic, coppery smell of the blood, the horrifying intimacy of the act. Her fingers probed, searching through the blinding pain she was causing, feeling for the frantic, severed pulse. There, she felt it, a thick, rubbery tube, twitching like a live thing. With a surge of adrenaline, she pinched it shut between her thumb and forefinger, clamping down with all her strength. The effect was instantaneous. The horrific gushing of blood slowed to a manageable, sluggish ooze. She was kneeling on the pavement of a Chicago street, soaked to the bone, her hand buried deep inside the leg of a living man, her fingers the only thing standing between him and death. Sirens, a beautiful, terrifying promise of help, screamed in the distance, growing closer with every beat of her own frantic heart. She looked up, her face a mask of fierce concentration and sheer terror, as the first police cruiser, lights flashing a hellish kaleidoscope of red and blue across the rain-swept scene, screeched to a halt just feet away. The clock had started. The woman kneeling on that bloody sidewalk was not born in that moment of crisis. She was forged over years of quiet observation, relentless work, and a stubborn, unwavering promise. 15 years before, in the hushed, antiseptic-smelling halls of a suburban hospital, an 11-year-old Kaylin Evans had watched her mother fade. The disease was a cruel, slow-motion thief, stealing her mother's strength, her laughter, her future. In that landscape of grief and fear, there had been one small point of light, a nurse named Sarah. Sarah was not a miracle worker. She couldn't reverse the inevitable. But she could, and did, bring dignity to the process. She wasn't just there to administer IV drips and check vitals. She was there to hold a frail hand, to adjust a pillow, to speak to Kai's mother, not as a collection of symptoms, but as a person. She saw the woman, not the patient. One afternoon, Sarah found a young Kai huddled in a chair, crying silently. She knelt down, her expression one of profound empathy, and said, "Your mom is so proud of you. She tells me every day. Being strong for her is the bravest thing in the world." In that moment, a seed was planted in the fertile ground of a young girl's heart. Kai didn't just want to be like Sarah, she felt a calling to be her. She made a silent promise to her mother's fading spirit. "I will be that person for someone else one day." That promise became her northern star. It guided her through the labyrinth of growing up in a blue-collar household where dreams were tempered by the hard reality of finances. Her father, a grease-stained auto mechanic with kind eyes, and her mother, a sharp-witted school secretary, were her biggest cheerleaders, but they could offer little more than moral support. The financial burden was hers alone. A montage of her life would show the grit behind the eventual scrubs. Flipping burgers after school, the smell of grease clinging to her clothes as she studied anatomy late into the night. Shelving books in the university library, her fingers tracing diagrams of the human circulatory system between shifts. The grueling, caffeine-fueled all-nighters of nursing school, her small apartment wallpapered with flashcards detailing drug interactions and pathologies. There were moments of doubt, staring at the ceiling at 3 a.m., the sheer volume of information threatening to drown her, the ever-growing number on her student loan portal, a source of constant, low-grade anxiety. But then she would remember the quiet dignity of that hospital room, the feel of her mother's hand and Sarah's compassionate face, and she would push on. Her first day as a registered nurse at North Central Hospital was a baptism by fire. The reality was a chaotic whirlwind of beeping machines, frantic doctors, and the deeply human smells of sickness and fear. It was more intense than any textbook could ever convey, but Kai thrived. She found her rhythm in the chaos. She had a gift, a way of connecting with patients that went beyond the chart. She could calm an elderly woman with dementia by humming a half-remembered tune from the 1950s. She could coax a terrified child into taking his medicine by turning it into a secret mission. More importantly, she was a fierce advocate. She learned early that in the vast, churning machine of modern healthcare, the patient could easily become a secondary concern to paperwork, liability, and protocol. She was the one who would argue with a resident over a delayed pain medication order, who would sit with a family and explain a complex diagnosis in simple, human terms after a doctor had breezed through in a blur of medical jargon. It was this very quality that put her on a collision course with Dr. Alan Croft, the chief of emergency medicine. Dr. Croft was a legend at North Central, a brilliant surgeon with hands that could perform miracles. But his brilliance was matched only by his arrogance. He moved through the ER like a king in his court, his authority absolute, his tolerance for error non-existent. He saw the hospital hierarchy as a rigid caste system. Doctors gave orders, nurses followed them. Period. Kai first landed in his crosshairs 3 months before the shooting. A patient had come in with abdominal pain, and Dr. Croft, after a cursory examination, had diagnosed him with gastritis and was preparing to discharge him. It's anxiety, induced, probably stress from his job, Croft had declared dismissively to the team. But Kai, who had spent 10 minutes talking to the patient, noted the man's clammy skin, his slightly elevated heart rate, and a specific, localized tenderness he described. It didn't feel like simple anxiety to her. While Croft was signing papers, Kai discreetly rechecked the patient's vitals. His temperature had ticked up by half a degree. A small thing, but it was a change. Trusting her gut, she approached Croft. "Dr. Croft," she said quietly, "Mr. Henderson's temp is now 99.8, and his rebound tenderness is more pronounced. Could we consider an ultrasound, just to rule out appendicitis?" Croft had turned slowly, his eyes narrowing. He was being questioned, publicly, by a nurse. The air grew thick. He re-examined the patient, his movements sharp and annoyed, and his expression soured when he felt what Kai had described. He ordered the ultrasound. It revealed an inflamed appendix on the verge of rupturing. Croft had saved the man from sepsis, but only because Kai had pushed him. He cornered her later, away from the patient. There was no gratitude in his voice, only cold fury. "You got lucky, Nurse Evans," he hissed, his voice low. "Do not ever question my diagnosis in front of a patient or my staff again. Your job is to follow my orders, not to play doctor. Stick to your charts and your bedpans. Am I understood?" The condescension was a physical blow. Kai simply nodded, her jaw tight, and walked away. From that day on, she was on his radar nail that stuck out, waiting for his hammer. At the same time, across the city, Marcus the Meteor Thorne was living a different reality. The quarterback for the Chicago Marauders, he was the city's favorite son. His story was the stuff of legends, a kid from a rough neighborhood who had used his rocket arm to catapult himself to stardom. His highlights were a weekly spectacle-perfect spirals, daring scrambles, game-winning drives. But off the field, he was even more impressive. He poured millions into his foundation, building community centers and funding scholarships for kids just like him. He was charismatic, humble, and genuinely good. He was the hero the city needed, a symbol of hope and perseverance. He was at the absolute peak of his career, a man who seemed invincible. 2 lives, running on parallel tracks. One forged in the quiet intensity of hospital wards, the other in the roaring crucible of NFL stadiums. They were worlds apart, until a single, desperate act on a rain-swept street fused their destinies together in a crucible of blood and heroism. The first paramedics on the scene, 2 veterans named Jackson and O'Reilly, burst from their ambulance into a scene of controlled chaos. They were expecting a mess. They always did. What they weren't expecting was a lone woman in scrubs, kneeling in a puddle of rainwater and blood, her entire hand seemingly swallowed by the victim's leg. "What the hell are you doing?" O'Reilly barked, his voice rough with urgency as he dropped his medical bag. "Get back, let us work." Kai didn't even look up from Marcus Thorne's pale, sweaty face. Her focus was absolute. "No," she snapped, her voice carrying an authority that cut through the noise. "Probable GSW to the femoral artery. I'm applying direct internal pressure to the vessel itself. He's hypotensive and going into shock. He'll bleed out in 10 seconds if I move. Get me a wide-bore IV line with saline now, and start bagging him." Her words, delivered with the rapid-fire precision of a seasoned trauma professional, stopped both paramedics in their tracks. This wasn't a hysterical bystander. This was one of them. Jackson's eyes widened slightly. He saw the deep concentration on her face, the way she held Marcus's gaze, murmuring to him, "Stay with me, Marcus. Stay with me. Help is here." He saw the blood, so much blood, soaking her from the waist down, and understood the desperate truth of the situation. She hadn't just put a hand on the wound, she was the clamp. A look of grudging, awestruck respect passed over Jackson's face. "You heard her, O'Reilly. Get the line," he ordered, kneeling opposite Kai. "What's his pulse?" "Thready and fast. Maybe 130, Kai responded, never breaking focus. "He's fading." In that moment, a silent bond of professionals formed amidst the chaos. They worked around her, a strange, bloody tableau of modern medicine meeting, battlefield improvisation. They trusted her. They had to. That trust evaporated the second the gurney crashed through the automatic doors of the North Central Hospital emergency room. The ER was Dr. Alan Croft's kingdom, and he ruled it with an iron fist. He was already there, alerted by the paramedics' call about a high-profile GSW. He stood, arms crossed, a general surveying his battlefield, ready to take command. When he saw the gurney, his face contorted, first in confusion, then in pure, unadulterated rage. There, on his gurney, in his ER, was not just a patient, but a civiliana nurse from his own hospital. He now realized, still leaning over the body, her hand buried in the patient's thigh. A contaminant, a breach, an affront to every sterile protocol he held sacred. "Get her out of here!" Croft's voice boomed across the trauma bay, silencing the flurry of activity. "What is this, a circus? Get your filthy hands off my patient now!" Kai looked up, her face pale, her eyes pleading. "Doctor, I'm holding the femoral. He'll exsanguinate." "I don't care what you're holding," he roared, his face turning a blotchy red. He was already pulling on sterile gloves, his movements sharp with fury. "You have contaminated the patient, the wound, and my entire trauma bay. Security, get this woman out of here." He lunged forward and grabbed Kai's shoulder, physically trying to haul her off the gurney. It was a shocking act of aggression, a dismissal so complete it was dehumanizing. "No!" Kai screamed, her voice cracking with desperation. She held her ground, her fingers still clamped tight inside Marcus's leg. "Not until you clamp it. He'll die. Just give me a hemostat." The other nurses and residents looked on, horrified and frozen, caught between their respect for Kai's desperate act and their fear of Croft's legendary temper. Finally, a senior nurse, her face grim, pushed forward. "Doctor, she's right. Let's get him prepped. We'll take over from her on 3. Croft shot the nurse a look that could kill, but he knew she was right. They had to stabilize the patient. With furious, jerky movements, he began barking orders. They worked around Kai for another 30 seconds, a whirlwind of sterile drapes and surgical instruments. Finally, a clamp was in place. "Okay, nurse. On 3. Release," the senior nurse said softly to Kai. 1, 2, 3. Kai slowly, painfully, uncurled her cramping fingers and withdrew her hand. It was covered in a thick, cooling glove of Marcus Thorne's blood. The moment she was clear, 2 security guards, responding to Croft's call, grabbed her arms. They were gentle but firm, escorting her out of the trauma bay like a trespasser. She was left standing alone in the hallway, covered in blood, trembling with a toxic cocktail of adrenaline, fury, and humiliation, as the man she had just saved disappeared into the operating room. The doors swung shut, sealing her out. She was still trying to process the violent injustice of the encounter when a new figure approached her. He was a man in a rumpled suit, with tired eyes and a demeanor that suggested he'd seen it all and was impressed by none of it. "Kalen Evans?" he asked, his voice flat. He didn't wait for an answer. "Detective Miller, Chicago PD. I need you to come with me. We have to talk." He led her not to a comfortable office, but to a small, sterile, windowless room used for difficult family conversations. It smelled of disinfectant and sorrow. Detective Miller didn't offer her a seat, water, or a word of comfort. He pulled out a notepad and clicked his pen. The sound was unnervingly loud in the small space. "Ma'am," he began, his tone cold and procedural, "I'm going to need you to walk me through your actions from the moment you witnessed the shooting." He wasn't asking as if she were a heroic witness. He was speaking to her as if she were a piece of the puzzle, and a messy one at that. Kai, still in shock, recounted the events. When she described putting her hand in the wound, Miller stopped writing and looked at her for the first time. There was no admiration in his eyes. There was only a weary, bureaucratic annoyance. "So you made physical contact with the victim, at the wound site, without any medical equipment?" he asked. "He was dying. I had to stop the bleeding," Kai whispered, her voice hoarse. Ma'am, do you understand that you entered a live crime scene? Miller pressed on, his voice devoid of emotion. Did you move the victim from his original position? Did you touch anything else? A weapon? Shell casings? Your actions, however well-intentioned, he said the words as if they were a distasteful legal necessity, have potentially compromised my entire investigation. We have to account for every piece of forensic evidence, and you, ma'am, have just become a very significant variable. He made her feel like a problem, a contamination. Every question was a subtle accusation, chipping away at the certainty of her actions. He took her blood-soaked scrubs as evidence, leaving her to change into a set of thin, disposable hospital garments that felt like a patient's gown. He treated her not as a hero, but as a nuisance who had complicated his paperwork. Just as she thought the nightmare might be over, a junior nurse appeared at the door. Kaylin, Director Sullivan wants to see you. Now. Director Sullivan's office was on the top floor. It was a world away from the controlled chaos of the ER. Here, everything was quiet, plush, and coldly corporate. Thick carpet muffled her footsteps. The air smelled of leather and money. Sullivan, a man in a perfectly tailored suit with silver hair and a smile that didn't reach his eyes, stood behind a vast mahogany desk. Dr. Slash. Croft was there too, standing by the window, arms crossed, a smug, vindicated look on his face. Kaylin, thank you for coming in, Sullivan said, his voice as smooth and polished as his desk. Please, have a seat. Kai sat, feeling small and out of place in her borrowed disposables. Kaylin, Sullivan began, steepling his fingers. What you did tonight was unorthodox. It was incredibly risky, and it was far outside the scope of your employment and this hospital's established policies. I saved his life, Kai said, her voice trembling with a nascent rage. Director Sullivan, he was going to die on that street. Perhaps, Sullivan conceded with a dismissive wave of his hand. Or perhaps you introduced a street-level infection that will cause him to lose his leg, or worse. Perhaps you dislodged a clot that will travel to his brain. We don't know. What we do know, and here he glanced at Dr. C's, Croft, is that you exposed this hospital, a multi-billion-dollar institution, to an unimaginable level of liability. Dr. Croft finally spoke, his voice dripping with condescension. She was reckless. A field amputation is less contaminating than what she did. If Mr. Thorne's career is over, if he suffers any long-term complications, his lawyers won't care about her intentions. They will care about the fact that an employee of this hospital, acting on her own, performed a grotesque, unsanctioned procedure, and they will sue us into the ground. The words hung in the air, cold and sharp. They had already calculated the financial risk. They had already decided her guilt. Sullivan delivered the final, crushing blow. His voice remained unnervingly calm. Therefore, effective immediately, you are placed on indefinite administrative leave. A full review will be conducted by the board and our legal team. In the meantime, you are not to come to the hospital, you are not to speak to the press, and you are, under no circumstances, to attempt to contact the patient or his family. Is that perfectly clear? Kai stared at him, stunned into silence. It wasn't a question. It was an order. She had walked into this hospital hours ago as a dedicated nurse. She was now walking out as a pariah, suspended and silenced. She had saved a man's life, and her reward was to be cast out, condemned by the very system she had dedicated her life to serving. As she walked in a daze through the hushed, empty corridors of the hospital, the injustice of it all began to burn within her, a white-hot rage that eclipsed even the shock and the fear. The door to Kai's small apartment clicked shut behind her, the sound echoing the finality of her exile. The place had never felt so empty, so silent. The adrenaline that had sustained her for hours drained away, leaving a hollow ache in its place. She stripped off the cheap disposable scrubs and stood under a scalding hot shower, watching the last pink-tinged swirls of Marcus Thorne's blood ore, what she imagined was his blood circle the drain. But she couldn't wash away the feeling of violation, of injustice. The next 12 hours were a descent into a personal hell of self-doubt and isolation. She curled up on her couch, wrapped in a blanket, and stared blankly at the television. The local news was on a loop. Star quarterback Marcus Thorne is in critical but stable condition at North Central Hospital after emergency surgery for a gunshot wound sustained in an apparent carjacking, a polished news anchor reported. Sources say the quick action of the North Central surgical team, led by renowned Chief of Emergency Medicine Dr. Alan Croft, was instrumental in saving his life. A photo of a confident, smiling Dr. Croft appeared on the screen. There was no mention of a nurse, no mention of a desperate act on a rain-swept street. It was as if she had never been there. The official hospital statement was even colder, a masterpiece of corporate evasion. Mr. Thorne is receiving the best possible care. An internal review is underway regarding the circumstances of his arrival to ensure all protocols were followed. Protocols. The word was a slap in the face. The narrative, crafted by Sullivan and Croft, was clear. The hospital was the hero. The system had worked. She, the anomaly, had been erased. A corrosive self-doubt began to creep in, whispering venomous questions in the silence of her apartment. Was Croft right? Did I make things worse? What if he gets a massive infection? What if he loses his leg because of me? She thought of his career, his foundation, everything he had built. What if her one-second decision had destroyed it all? The weight of that possibility was crushing, a physical pressure on her chest that made it hard to breathe. Her phone buzzed incessantly with calls from her sister and parents, but she ignored them. How could she explain? "Hi, Mom. I saved a man's life and I might get sued and lose my nursing license for it." She felt ashamed, confused, and utterly, profoundly alone. She was an outcast, a hero in isolation, her brave act twisted into a liability by men in expensive suits. But in the digital world, beyond the curated narratives of television news, a different story was beginning to foment. The spark was lit by Jackson, the paramedic who had worked alongside her. He had gone home after his shift, stewing, haunted by the image of Kai's fierce determination and the sound of Dr. Slash Croft's bellowing rage. He couldn't stomach the official story he saw on the news. It was a lie. Anonymously, using a burner email account, he sent a detailed message to Chicago Sidelines, a popular, independent sports blog run by a notoriously tenacious journalist named Mike Chen. Subject: "You're getting the Marcus Thorne story wrong." Body: "I was one of the first paramedics on scene. The reason he's alive is because of a nurse who was there before us. She was off duty. She had her entire hand inside his leg, pinching the femoral artery shut. No gear, no gloves, just guts. She kept him alive. When we got him to North Central, I saw Dr. NRS Croft scream at her and have security throw her out. They're trying to bury this. They're trying to erase her. You want the real story? She's the hero." At the same time, halfway across the city, a university student named Chloe was scrolling through her phone. She'd been 20 feet away from the shooting, and like a dozen other people, had instinctively filmed it. Her video was shaky, grainy, and mostly useless. But in it, for about 15 seconds before the police arrived, was a clear shot. A woman in scrubs, kneeling in the rain, her body shielding Marcus Thorne's, her posture one of intense, unwavering focus. Chloe uploaded the clip to TikTok with a simple caption: "This woman was helping him before anyone else got there. Marcus Thorne, Chicago shooting." The two sparks landed in the dry tinder of the internet and exploded. Mike Chen's blog post, "The Real Angel of Chicago, Hospital Trees to Hide Nurse Who Saved Marcus Thorne," went live at 4 a.m. It included the paramedic's entire anonymous account. Within an hour, it had been shared 10,000 times. Chloe's TikTok was stitched, duetted, and shared until it was being seen by millions. The hashtag #HeroNurseKai was born. Then it started trending. First in Chicago, then nationally, then globally. The public, armed with a narrative that felt raw and true, turned with righteous fury on the established powers. Memes flooded the internet. Kai's face photoshopped onto Joan of Arc's body, Dr. Croft's face on the body of a cartoon villain. People pieced together her name, her workplace. A We Stand With Kai Facebook group amassed 100 members in 3 hours. A GoFundMe started by a fellow nurse from a different hospital, intended to cover Kai's potential legal fees and lost wages, blew past its 10-0 goal in minutes. By dawn, it had surpassed 200-0. The outrage was palpable. It was a perfect storm of public anger against everything people hated: arrogant authority figures, faceless corporations protecting their bottom line, and systems that punished bravery. The audience, now global, felt the same rage Kai had felt, and they were giving it a voice, a million voices strong. Back in his private ICU room at North Central, Marcus Thorne was swimming up through a fog of anesthesia. The first thing he was aware of was a dull, throbbing pain in his leg and a profound, bone-deep exhaustion. He opened his eyes. The blurry faces of his family, his agent, and his coach slowly came into focus. A doctor, not Croft, was speaking to him in a low, calm voice. "Very lucky. The surgery was successful. We were able to repair the artery." Marcus's mind was still syrupy, but one memory was crystal clear, a beacon in the fog, a face, a voice, the feeling of unimaginable pain, and then a pressure that had saved him. He interrupted the doctor, his own voice a dry, hoarse rasp. "The nurse." Everyone looked at him. "The girl. On the street," he breathed, the effort immense. "Is she okay? I need to thank her." His agent, a sharp-suited man named Leo, looked confused. "Marcus, the doctors here saved you." "No," Marcus insisted, a flicker of his old strength returning to his eyes. He remembered her face, framed by the rain, her eyes wide with fear but her hands steady. He remembered her voice, cutting through his pain and panic. "Stay with me, Marcus. Stay with me." There was a nurse. Before the ambulance. She put her hand in the wound. "She kept talking to me. She saved my life." He looked around the room, at the faces of the people who loved him. "Find her, please. She was my guardian angel." Leo stared at him, then at the doctor, then pulled out his phone. He saw the trending hashtags. He saw Mike Chen's blog post. He saw the grainy TikTok video. The hospital's carefully constructed narrative had just been obliterated by the one man they couldn't contradict. The hero had spoken. The digital firestorm that had raged all morning became a real-world inferno by noon. News vans were camped outside North Central Hospital like vultures. The hospital's phone lines were jammed with angry calls. The Chicago Marauders organization, having heard Marcus's first-hand account, had released a terse but powerful statement. "We are eternally grateful to the heroic citizen who saved our quarterback's life, and we are deeply concerned by reports of her treatment." The pressure was immense, a hydraulic press of public opinion, and Director Sullivan knew he was on the verge of being crushed. The PR crisis was escalating into a full-blown catastrophe. He had no choice. He had to face the monster he had created. The press conference was held in a crowded hospital auditorium. The air crackled with hostility. Director Sullivan stood at a podium, his usual polished composure looking frayed at the edges. His face was pale, his smile a tight, unnatural rictus. Beside him, Dr. Croft looked like a man being led to his own execution. His arrogance had been replaced by a pallid, sweaty fear. Sullivan cleared his throat and began to read from a prepared statement, his voice dripping with a false sincerity that fooled no one. "Good afternoon. We are here today to provide an update on Marcus Thorne and to clarify the events surrounding his admission." He spoke of Kai's actions, now reframed as unconventional but ultimately successful, and a testament to the dedication of all healthcare professionals. It was a pathetic, transparent attempt to co-opt her heroism. "We are, of course, incredibly proud of Nurse Evans," Sullivan continued, the lie tasting like ash in his mouth. "The administrative leave was a standard procedural step in a situation of this magnitude, and after a swift and thorough review, we are pleased to announce it has been concluded entirely in her favor. She has been fully reinstated with our deepest apologies for any misunderstanding." The reporters smelled blood. A barrage of questions flew from the crowd. "Director, why was she suspended in the first place if she was a hero?" "Dr. Croft, do you stand by your initial assessment that she was reckless and contaminated the patient?" Croft stepped to the microphone, visibly trembling. "In the heat of a trauma situation, protocols are," he stammered, his usual eloquence gone. He was a shell of the imperious man from the night before, his career and reputation visibly imploding under the glare of 100 cameras. The audience watching at home, and Kai watching from her couch, felt a surge of cathartic, righteous satisfaction. The villains were getting their public comeuppance. While the hospital was attempting its clumsy damage control, a black car sent by the Chicago Marauders pulled up outside Kai's apartment building. The team owner himself had called her, his voice warm with genuine gratitude. He asked if she would be willing to visit Marcus. Her arrival at the hospital was different this time, no security guards manhandling her. She was escorted by the team's head of security to the VIP wing. The reunion was in Marcus Thorne's private room. The chaotic, bloody memory of the street and the ER felt a world away. Marcus was sitting up in bed, his leg elevated, looking pale and weak but undeniably alive. When Kai walked in, his face broke into a wide, brilliant smile. The quiet of the room was thick with unspoken emotion. He held out his hand, not the one on his IV side, but his free one. Tentatively, Kai took it. It was the first time they had touched since she had pressed her fingers into his wound. "They told me your name, Kai," he said, his voice still raspy but full of warmth. "I don't remember much. But I remember your voice, and your eyes. You looked scared, but you didn't look away." He squeezed her hand gently. "Thank you isn't a big enough word. You gave me my life back." Kai, who had held it together through the chaos, the interrogation, and the suspension, finally broke. The tears she had been holding back for 24 hours streamed down her face, tears of relief, of vindication, of a profound emotional release. It was a quiet, deeply human moment of connection and gratitude, the true reward for her actions. The next afternoon, exactly 24 hours after she had knelt on that bloody pavement, Kai found herself in an even more surreal environment, the Chicago Marauders' massive, state-of-the-art indoor training facility. The team had called a major press event. A podium was set up on the 50-yard line of the pristine turf. The entire team, the coaching staff, and rows of cameras were all focused on her. The team owner, a billionaire with a surprisingly gentle demeanor, stood beside her. "In the NFL," he said, his voice booming through the facility's sound system, "we sign players for their strength, their speed, and their talent. We reward them for what they can do on this field. But today, we want to do something different. Today, we want to sign someone for their heart, for their courage, and for their humanity." He turned to Kai, his eyes filled with sincere admiration. "Kaylin Evans represents the very best of this city. When others ran away, she ran towards. She is a true hero." An assistant brought out a large, beautifully framed document. It looked like an official NFL player contract. "We would like to make Kaylin an official, lifelong member of the Chicago Marauders family," the owner announced. "This is an honorary contract. But," he added with a grin, "like all our contracts, it comes with a signing bonus." He presented her with the frame and a check. Kai looked down at it, her eyes widening in disbelief. The check was made out to Kaylin Evans for the amount of $250,000. It was more money than she had ever seen in her life, enough to wipe out her student debt, help her family, and start fresh. The owner handed her a pen. With a trembling hand, amidst the thunderous applause of professional athletes and the blinding flash of cameras, Kai signed the contract. She had gone from being a suspended, shamed outcast to a celebrated city icon, her name now and forever linked with the team she helped save. The nightmare was over. The vindication was absolute. The story of Kai Evans and her honorary contract did not end with the press conference. The ripples from her one-second decision continued to spread, reshaping lives and institutions in their wake. A documentary-style montage could show the inevitable fallout and the unexpected blessings. The first casualty was Dr. Alan Croft. He wasn't fired, not officially. The hospital couldn't risk a wrongful termination suit. Instead, he was quietly and swiftly reassigned. He was removed from his prestigious role as chief of emergency medicine and given a non-patient-facing administrative position in a basement office, reviewing insurance claim data. His authority was gone, his reputation shattered. He became a ghost in the hospital halls, a walking cautionary tale among the medical staff about how arrogance and a slavish devotion to protocol could eclipse the very humanity the profession was meant to serve. Director Sullivan survived, but his authority was permanently damaged. The hospital's board, under immense pressure from donors and the public, forced him to implement sweeping changes. North Central established the Kaylin Evans Good Samaritan Protocol, a new, hospital-wide policy that explicitly protected and legally indemnified any medical staff who rendered aid in off-duty emergencies. Furthermore, as a public act of contrition, the hospital made a 7-figure donation to a new charity Kai was asked to help establish. Detective Miller, too, faced consequences. While an internal affairs review cleared him of any official wrongdoing he had, technically, followed procedure, he was given a formal reprimand for his lack of professional discretion and situational awareness in his handling of a heroic citizen. He was quietly reassigned from the high-profile homicide division to the stolen auto unit, a clear demotion. The system had been forced to acknowledge, in its own bureaucratic way, that procedure without judgment is a hollow exercise. For Kai, the changes were seismic. The first thing she did was walk into her bank and pay off her entire student loan balance in one lump sum. The bank teller, who recognized her from the news, broke into applause. It was a moment of profound personal liberation, the shedding of a burden she had carried for nearly a decade. She didn't quit her job. Nursing wasn't just a job to her, it was a calling. But she was different now. When she returned to work at North Central, she walked with a newfound confidence. The whispers that followed her were not of gossip, but of awe. Her colleagues looked at her with a new respect. She had faced down the system and won. She became an informal leader, the person other nurses came to when they felt a patient was being overlooked or a protocol was impeding proper care. With the team's support, she used the rest of her signing bonus and the platform she'd been given to establish the Promise Scholarship Fund, providing full financial aid for nursing students from low-income families in the Chicago area. Tribute to the nurse, Sarah, who had inspired her all those years ago. 6 months later, the city held its breath. At Soldier Field, under the bright lights of a Monday night football broadcast, Marcus, the Meteor, Thorne, after a grueling and miraculous rehabilitation, trotted back onto the field. The roar from the crowd was deafening. It was more than an ovation for a football player. It was a celebration of resilience, a roar of thanks for the woman who had made this moment possible. Before the first snap, Marcus took a knee, not in protest, but in a moment of quiet reflection. He then tapped his wrist, where the initials K.E. were written in bold black marker on his athletic tape, and pointed up to the owner's box. The cameras followed his gesture, zooming in on Kai, who was watching the game with her proud, beaming parents. The commentators retold her story, her legend now woven into the fabric of the city and the league. He was playing for more than just a win. He was playing for her. A week after Marcus Thorne's triumphant return, life at North Central Hospital had settled back into its familiar, humming rhythm of controlled chaos. The fame, the cameras, the press conferences, they had all faded, leaving behind the enduring reality of the work itself. Kaylin Evans was back where she belonged, in her scrubs, her hair pulled back in a practical ponytail. She was no longer just Nurse Evans. She was Kai, a figure of quiet authority and deep respect. The honorary contract was framed on her apartment wall, a surreal memento of a whirlwind 24 hours, but her true legacy walked the halls with her. She was making her rounds when she saw a young intern, his face pale with panic, fumbling to insert an IV line into the fragile vein of an elderly patient. He was sweating, his hands shaking, and the patient was wincing in discomfort. From across the hall, Kai could almost hear the phantom echo of Dr. Aju. Croft's biting criticism, the kind of humiliation that crushed confidence rather than building it. Instead of walking past, Kai changed her course. She approached the intern slowly, her footsteps soft. She didn't speak to him at first. She simply smiled warmly at the elderly patient. "He's just making sure to find the perfect spot for you, Helen," she said, her voice calm and reassuring. Then she turned to the intern. She didn't take over. She didn't reprimand him. She simply placed a gentle hand on his shoulder. "Breathe," she said softly. "You've got this. Try anchoring the vein from below with your thumb. It keeps it from rolling, just like we practiced." The intern looked up at her, his eyes wide with gratitude. He took a deep breath, repositioned his hands as she'd suggested, and this time, the catheter slid in smoothly. A small victory, unseen by the world, but monumental in that moment. Kai gave his shoulder a final, encouraging squeeze and continued on her way. She was the person she had promised her mother she would be. She was Sarah. The final shot would not be of a stadium or a podium. It would be of Kai, walking down the long, brightly lit corridor of the hospital. She stops at a patient's door, peeks in, and shares a small, knowing smile with the person inside. She is not a celebrity. She is a nurse. The camera pulls back slowly, holding on the image of her moving with purpose and grace through the world she had fought so hard for. A quiet hero defined not by one public moment of glory, but by a lifetime of small, compassionate, and courageous acts. Her contract with the team was a symbol of a single, extraordinary day. Her contract with humanity was for life.